Welcome to the Last Secret channel. Today I'm sharing a chilling and captivating story that will keep you hooked until the very end. This content is perfect for listening to while studying, relaxing, or when you want to immerse yourself in the eerie and mysterious. If you enjoy this type of content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Our goal is to reach 10,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. Now get ready to step into a world of darkness and the unknown. The summer started like any other. I took up babysitting to earn some extra cash, sticking to families I knew, friends, neighbours, acquaintances. It was easy, predictable and safe. But as my savings dwindled, I got desperate and decided to post an ad online. A few days later, a family needed a nighttime babysitter for their son. The house was on the outskirts of town, isolated near the edge of the woods. No neighbours, no streetlights, just trees. I hesitated. Who lives in the middle of nowhere? But the pay was good, and I convinced myself it would be fine. When I arrived, the house was charming, a small, cosy cabin surrounded by a garden with tiny lanterns. An old swing creaked in the wind at the edge of the yard, near a path that led into the forest. Inside, the house was warm and rustic, with a large window that framed the woods like a painting. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, a master bedroom and a smaller one for their son, Jason. There was also a tiny attic with a window that overlooked the forest. Jason was about 5 or 6, a quiet kid who didn't give me any trouble. Once he was asleep, I had the house to myself. That first night, curiosity got the better of me. I wandered through the house, drawn to the master bedroom. I know it's not polite, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted to know more about the people who hired me. I rummaged through drawers, finding old trinkets, coins, notebooks, buttons, and a small ceramic horse. I held the horse up to the moonlight streaming through the window, admiring its delicate craftsmanship. Then a shadow fell over it, a massive shadow. I froze. Something was outside the window, something big. My mind raced. A bird, a branch. But it was too large, too deliberate. I didn't dare look. Minutes passed before the shadow slowly slid away, leaving the room bathed in moonlight once more. I shoved the horse into my pocket, my hands trembling. For the first time, I felt uneasy about the house, as though something unseen was watching. I tried to shake off the feeling, but then I noticed the attic door was slightly open. A chill ran down my spine. Was someone else here? "Jason," I called out, my voice unsteady. A faint response came, but not from his room. It came from the attic. My heart pounded as I climbed the narrow staircase. The attic was dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through a small window. Jason sat there, his back to me, staring out at the forest. "Jason," I whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What are you doing up here? It's late." He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the trees. I sat beside him, drawn by the same view. The forest was dense, the path disappearing into darkness. The trees seemed to close in on themselves, swallowing the light. "What are you looking at?" I asked softly. He pointed. "Mom." I blinked, confused. "Your mom? She's not out there. She's—" "Do you know what lurking means?" he interrupted, his tone unnervingly calm. I hesitated. "It means hiding in the dark, waiting for something or someone." He nodded. "That's what Mom's doing. She's lurking." A cold wave of fear washed over me. "Jason, that's enough. Your mom's not out there. Let's get you back to bed." As I tucked him in, he stared at me with unsettling intensity. Just as I was about to leave, he whispered, "Do you want to know why she's out there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Jason's parents returned a little after midnight. I greeted them at the door, still clutching the ceramic horse. "Was everything okay?" his father asked. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. But Jason's mother lingered, her gaze unsettling. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They offered to drive me home, but I declined. Instead, I rode my bike to the end of their street. Yet, for some reason, I couldn't leave. I turned back, drawn to the house like a moth to a flame. Climbing the fence, I perched on the porch roof, peering into Jason's bedroom window. The glass shimmered in the moonlight, but something was off. The window was covered in scratches, deep, jagged marks that hadn't been there before. I sat there, staring at the woods, the house, and the room where Jason's parents slept. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves. Then I saw it. A shadow moved in the hallway, tall and thin, its arms unnaturally long, dragging against the floor. It stopped at the parents' bedroom door and slipped inside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The shadow loomed over Jason's mother, its bony fingers hovering above her face. Then it began to count. 1, 2, 3. Though its voice was silent, I felt the words in my chest, each number vibrating through me. Suddenly the shadow turned. It looked at me. In that instant, I bolted, my body finally breaking free from the paralysis. I ran, leaving my bike behind, sprinting all the way home. When I burst through the door, my mom scolded me for being late, but I didn't care. I dove under my blanket, trembling. Even now, I can't explain what I saw. But I know one thing, that shadow was looking for something, and maybe it still is. The house was silent, suffocatingly so. My heart pounded as I pressed my ear to the bathroom door, desperate to hear something, anything. Breathing, footsteps, movement, nothing. "Lynn," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. My shaking hand reached for the lock. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach, but staying locked in the bathroom all night wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and cracked it open. The hallway was empty, bathed in the faint glow of a nightlight. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting and stretching in ways that made my skin crawl. I forced myself to step out, glancing quickly in both directions. "Lynn," I called again, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. Maybe she'd left. Maybe this was some cruel prank, and it was over. But the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I crept toward the bedroom. The door was ajar, and the darkness inside felt heavier, thicker than it should have been. Swallowing my fear, I reached for the light switch. The bulb flickered to life, revealing nothing out of place. The bed was neatly made, the room perfectly normal. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me, until I heard it. A soft creak. It came from downstairs. My stomach churned as I strained to hear more. The sound was deliberate, as if someone wanted me to know they were there. Heart pounding, I descended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The darkness of the living room and kitchen loomed ahead, swallowing the faint light behind me. I scanned the shadows, my eyes darting from corner to corner. Then I saw her. Lynn stood by the kitchen table, bathed in the dim glow of moonlight streaming through the window. Her head hung low, her long dark hair obscuring her face. Her arms dangled at her sides, limp and lifeless. "Lynn?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't move. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. That's when I noticed the object in her hand, a knife. Its blade gleamed in the moonlight, sharp and menacing. "Lynn, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Slowly she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her lips stretched into a smile too wide, too unnatural. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto mine. It wasn't her. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, guttural, and laced with something inhuman. "You've joined my game now." My legs buckled, and I stumbled back, hitting the wall. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the house into darkness. The next morning, I mustered the courage to text her. "Lynn, I can't do this anymore. We need to talk about what happened last night. Please, tell me this was just a joke." Hours passed without a reply. Just as I began to convince myself she wouldn't answer, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to answer, but ignoring her wasn't an option. I swiped to accept the call, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered. "Where did you go?" Her tone was soft, almost hurt, but there was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. "Lynn, what happened last night? Why were you acting like that?" My words tumbled out, shaky and desperate. A pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice calm and unnervingly casual. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my fear bubbling into anger. "You were standing there, watching me with that knife. You smiled like—" "Like what?" she interrupted, her tone eerily serene. I hesitated. I didn't know how to describe the terror I'd felt, the way her face twisted into something inhuman. "Just tell me it was a joke," I pleaded. "Tell me this was all some stupid prank." She chuckled softly, the sound hollow and cold. "You're imagining things. Maybe you need some rest." Her words hit me like a slap. She was trying to make me doubt myself, to make me question what I'd seen. "I'm not coming back until you promise this will never happen again," I said firmly. Another pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost a whisper. "Okay, if that's what you want, okay." But something in her tone made my blood run cold. Later that day, I decided to return to the house, not to reconcile, but to gather my things. I couldn't live there anymore. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. Lynn's car wasn't in the driveway. Relieved, I hurried inside and began packing. Everything seemed normal, too normal. The knife I'd seen in her hand was back in its place on the kitchen counter, spotless and neatly arranged. But then I saw it. A piece of paper on the dining table. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Scrawled in large, uneven letters were the words, "I'll never stop playing." A shadow fell over me, and I felt the unmistakable presence of someone standing behind me. "Something smells off," Chris said, taking a cautious step back. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. The stench was unbearable, decay mixed with something indescribable, something cold and lifeless. The house itself seemed to exude an unnatural stillness, as if it had been abandoned by time. "Where's Lynn?" My voice cracked with fear. Chris shook his head and gestured toward the living room. "I don't know, but nothing about this place feels right. Maybe we misunderstood. Maybe." Ignoring him, I moved toward the living room. The air grew heavier with each step. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, and though the house was empty, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Something was watching. "Ben, over here," Chris called out. He was standing by one of the windows, staring at something. As I approached, I saw it too, a dark, viscous stain on the far wall. It oozed a thick black liquid that pooled on the floor, the source of the stench that made my stomach churn. What is that?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. Chris leaned in closer, squinting at the stain. "I don't know. It looks like blood. But it's wrong. We need to get out of here." Before I could respond, a faint rustling sound came from one of the back rooms. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the sound of a house settling or the wind. It was deliberate, like someone or something was moving. Chris froze. What was that? The sound came again, louder this time, accompanied by a faint creak. My heart pounded as we turned toward the source. We were standing on the threshold of something we didn't understand, something far beyond us. "We need to leave," Chris said, his voice trembling. But before we could act, soft footsteps echoed behind us. Slow, measured. My breath caught in my throat as I turned, and there she was. Lynn. She stood in the doorway, her face illuminated by the dim light filtering through the window. But it wasn't her. Not really. Her eyes were hollow, her expression unnervingly blank. And then she smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across her face. "Lynn?" Chris's voice was barely a whisper. She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring, that twisted smile never faltering. "What's wrong with you?" I managed to say, my voice shaking. Still, she said nothing. Slowly, she began to move toward us, her steps jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being dragged along by invisible strings. Chris grabbed my arm. "Ben, we need to go." But I couldn't move. This was Lynn, my wife. I couldn't just leave her. "Lynn," I said, taking a hesitant step forward, "it's me. Let me help you." Her head tilted sharply to the side, and for a moment her smile faltered. Then, with a sudden, bone-cracking twist, she snapped her head back to face me. Her eyes gleamed with something dark and unrecognizable. "Ben, get back!" Chris shouted, pulling me away just as Lynn lunged. Her movements were inhumanly fast, her body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. We bolted for the door, the sound of her nails scraping against the walls chasing us. As we stumbled outside, I dared a glance back. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the darkness of the house. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure malice. The police found nothing. They searched the house, but there was no sign of Lynn, no evidence of the black stain or the sounds we'd heard. They chalked it up to stress, maybe a shared hallucination brought on by fear. But I knew better. I stayed at a hotel that night, far from the house. Chris offered to stay with me, but I needed to be alone to process what had happened. Hours passed, but sleep never came. Then, at 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I found you." Attached was a photo. It was grainy, but I recognized the eyes immediately. Lynn's eyes. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. I glanced around the room, but it was empty, or so it seemed. Now I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. I'm alone, terrified, and I can't shake the feeling that she's here, watching, waiting. And I know this isn't over.